we'll take our 1:30
Can you?
capital improvement
Okay.
plan, discussion of
Put
draft
some bail
Lassen County-based planning, discussion of draft capital improvement plan.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I'll start off. You've got two things in your packet, two separate but related items. The first in your packet is the draft capital improvement plan. The second is the draft space needs study. Both of these are intended to be rough, first run drafts for discussion purposes. That's the reason for the discussion today. They incorporate a lot of the ideas we've talked about over the last several months, but this is the first step in the process of engaging the board, public, anyone else that's interested in developing these documents to their finality. I would like to start with the space plan. Mr. Munyon, that some of you will recognize from the resource group, is here today. Harry has been involved in county projects. We were talking earlier, dating back to the construction of the jail on Chestnut Street back in 1987, and Juvenile Hall, several other smaller projects and analysis that we've hired him to do over the years. So the county, about a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago, engaged Harry's firm to do the space study. He, along with Julie, prior CAOs, and myself, have surveyed departments, existing functions, current space, and future needs. And that's what we're trying to incorporate into this document as a plan to move forward as far as better housing our functions in a more efficient manner, and hopefully more manner that's easier for the public to access our services. And so with that, I think I'll let Mr. Munyon go through the draft, and I guess at any time we're at the end, we can entertain questions, discussion, what have you.
Please interrupt any time. It's often easier when the document's in front of us at that particular time, and it won't throw me off track. As the CAO said, this is a work in progress. We're setting the direction for the county for the next 10 to 20 years. And again, as the CAO said, the method in which we deliver services to the citizens of the county. Once the direction is set, and obviously we need your input to set it in any kind of final form, then you can proceed with such things as an energy survey. One of the things that appears, as an example, one of the things that appears to us to be necessary or worth doing financially is, for example, looking at the energy in the buildings that are going to be retained as part of this. And maybe even some other buildings, depending on what you want to do. But just looking at the fenestration, the windows. And you're far better off, as the CAO and I talked last night, if you're going to do windows in one building, you probably want to do them in all your buildings at the same time, because you're going to get a better bid on a larger project, you're going to attract more bidders and that sort of thing. So those all come after we get the direction set. If you look at page 2 at the top of the document, draft document you saw, we set some planning goals. The planning goal the last time we did this a decade ago was to try to do, one of the primary planning goals, is to try to bring as many services together as we could so citizens would have a one-stop sort of experience when they came to the county. Well, things have changed since then. A couple of things happened. One, you've got a new courthouse that's removed quite a bit from the existing historic courthouse. In addition, Health and Human Services is pretty well set in certain areas in leased buildings, which makes sense. So we end up with a three-piece one-stop operation. What this document is proposing at this point is, first of all, county administrative planning and building functions and the public works administrative functions come together in one area. That area would be historic courthouse square. What we propose for now is that the historic courthouse itself The assessor, clerk recorder, elections, and treasurer tax collector stay basically where they are. Out of the admin building behind the court building, we would move administration, the auditor, county council, and personnel into the historic court building. Along with them, we would move your offices, the Board of Supervisors' offices. We would convert the main historic court into a board meeting room to replace this. Give you more space. It would allow us to take that historic court room and keep it intact basically. We'd have to redesign a little bit in the front. But it looks as though that could be accomplished easily. And then you could use it for ceremonial functions, retirements, whatever. You could use it for planning board meetings, a lot of other uses. So it would get a fair amount of use. Once we do that, then the next step is what we do, and this is, let me talk about probable cost for a second for that first one.
If you look at, can I interrupt for just a second before we get any further, because I think it's a very important point that our impression of the board and the public's input to date is that we're going to maintain the historic courthouse as, for lack of a better word, the iconic center of the county. And along with that, and I wholeheartedly support that idea. I think it probably makes economic sense as well as preservation of the historic building. But it comes with some significant expense, and predominantly that means an elevator in that building. In my view, it's not going to get any cheaper to put an elevator in that building 10 years or 20 years from now as opposed to doing it today. And I think that's a fundamental decision to make that structure, that building, the center of the county. And I think we need to make that decision with open eyes, understanding that it comes with some expense. And we've gone forward with a plan assuming, so if our assumption's wrong, let us know, but assuming that that's the case. So if that assumption's different, we need to talk about it.
Harry, you have a question?
When did you yourself decide, or were you told to do this, that the courthouse is going to have a Board of Supervisors boardroom in it?
I'm sorry? The board, when it's going to have a board supervisor.
I mean, who told you that that was picked and selected and for the new boardroom?
All right, well, let me back up a little bit. The basic decision that building would be kept has been around now for 2 decades, essentially. Well, when you're keeping that and you're moving, you want one-stop county services for citizens on Courthouse Square, then that means that we need to get Board of Supervisors, because they are the county, essentially. They need to get into the primary iconic structure, as the CAO says, and it makes sense to use that room as it stands, rather than try to chop it up into offices, which would be more expensive, as the boardroom. So together with the administrative office, and as I say, this has been over the last couple decades, we have always thought that would be the best use of that space.
20 years ago.
20 years ago, we started thinking about this. I've been working in the county for a long time. There have been previous planning studies. But then, in those days, of course, it was occupied by the courts. So you weren't going to be able to do anything. But looking long range, that's what the thought has been.
But you do know that this year, other locations have been discussed, other than, I didn't realize that your study would be just a decision somebody made that the courthouse would be used for the new boardroom.
Okay, well, nobody has made a decision. That's why we're here. We're presenting what our recommendations, not just mine, but the
Okay, I
administrative.
don't see anything else in here that would, any other location.
That's because that's the center of the county. It's the iconic center. If we're going to have that as the iconic center, then we have to get the Board of Supervisors there.
Well,
Let's don't get into detail with the specifics. This is a general plan that this man has come up with, and he's just presenting it to us. We got a long ways to go, I think.
I appreciate that,
Elaine,
yeah.
Especially.
The presumption that a decision has been made is false.
Okay,
Yeah, that's,
Yeah, exactly.
This
No,
is the
no
first
decision
baby
got
step.
made.
yeah, it's just the only thing he offers,
That's okay.
okay?
It's a start, it's a start.
and one of the other considerations, of course, is getting out of this building. That'll come in just a few minutes. All right, so if we get that done, then we have essentially all of those areas: administration, board of supervisors, assessor, auditor, clerk recorder, county council, elections, personnel, treasurer, tax collector, all in a central location, one-stop services. To that, and we'll get back to cost in just a minute. To that, we're also proposing using the current admin building, current CAO's location. We're proposing relocating planning and building services and public works administration into those buildings, because at that point, we'll already have personnel, CAO, county council, and so on, over in the courthouse itself. Once we've done that, we will still have some space there, and we've talked about add-ons that we can put in there and also in the BLM building. Because the next piece of one-stop, all right, we got one-stop for primary county services, board of supervisors, admin, all that sort of thing, on Courthouse Square. The next piece becomes the justice piece. In the justice piece, we're proposing that the DA, child support, probation, and the public defender move closer to the courthouse in a single location. It appears from what we know now that the BLM building will become available. The CEO and I have talked about this at some length, and he's got some cost figures, but buying that seems to be the most cost-effective way to do it. Also, in this plan, child support, who has, of course, a strong relationship with the courts too, brings with it an income stream. And again, the CEO will tell you a little bit more about that. So that helps us with that piece of what we do with the Justice Center. Now, the income stream of child support comes with a cost, because we have to improve the security on a BLM building. They require things like bullet-resistant or bulletproof glass, certain security on doors, that kind of thing. But, and as part of the process, what you would end up doing is figuring out what your payback was when you started design. But it probably would come out in your favor.
So why do we have to have bulletproof glass and stuff?
It's a requirement for child support. They have a whole series of requirements about what security things they have to have. The current space they're leasing right now had to be improved that way. And as you know, that kind of thing can be fairly expensive. But it comes with it. In other words, for them to be able to use what is typically their lease money to pay the county instead of paying a developer, we would have to bring it up to the standards required for them to be able to pay lease payments.
So if they were to move to the BLM building, are all the windows in that?
No, just where they're located. Just a piece that they're in.
The reception area.
Yeah, the area that they're in. They're in, we figured about 6,000 square feet right now, and probably really need about 2,000.
Could I ask a couple questions?
Sure.
Could we get the monthly utility bills in that BLM building as it stands?
I don't have them
No,
yet.
no, I mean,
and I think probably,
Yes.
that's a be part of our, if we decide to pursue that as an option, then I guess what I'd do is ask the board to appoint me as a real property negotiator, and then that would come out of that.
Okay. Yeah, when was that built?
90s? Yeah, I believe it's about 20 years old.
Just ballpark,
Yeah.
okay.
I think they built it and had a 20-year lease, is my recollection, so.
And can we tour that? Can we take a walk through that?
I have spoken with the owner of the building, lives in Oregon. She stopped by a week ago, introduced herself to me, indicated they'd be interested in negotiating some sort of lease, purchase, everything's on the table. They don't really have a use for the building, actually BLM uses that. So interested in working with the county and offered to take a tour of it. And she gave me a phone number of her local manager that could take us through that. They expect, even though their lease doesn't terminate until March, that the BLM will move out sometime in January. So maybe
About 17,000 square feet, it's a big building.
If I recall correctly from the report, there was a note in there that sometimes district attorneys and public defenders prefer not to be located in the same location. I saw that as a former district attorney. I had a conversation with folks in the public defender's office here about that very issue, and with the new district attorney. I don't see that as being an issue.
That's good, that's
As there are times when you might want to meet with witnesses.
Well, I was going to say, you might want to keep victim witness at another location.
No, I don't even think that that's necessarily
Okay,
the case.
in a separate
but-
entity.
But there may be privacy accommodations made so that people can come and go, and that perhaps their adversary doesn't necessarily see that. That, I think, can be built in, that would still give this kind of justice facility concept the efficiency that you're thinking about.
And then again, there would be some fill-ins, maybe the ag commissioner, that sort of thing, once we knew exactly what space was going to be used. Those are the basic things. And one of the things that's already in process is relocating the tenants of the Roosevelt building because of the quality of that building and that sort of thing. And the other is the future of what you do with this building. While all this shuffling's going on, you might have to use it for some interim space. There was, several years ago, talk of sale or trade with the city. That's one way for it to go. Or sale to anybody else that was interested in it. We had a fourth item on there about immigrant temporary holding. We prefer you just get that the heck out of there, because as we've looked more at what the immigrants are, you don't want them in your county. So that should be scratched off there. Parking is always going to be an issue, but there is some relief in historic Courthouse Square because you got rid of the 1969 jail, it's gone. So you could do some on-site parking in there. Now, the next thing to talk about is cost. And Richard and I are going to tag team this a little bit. But if you go back to page 3, we started looking at the probable cost for the courthouse itself. We gave you a range on the courthouse. We gave you a low and a high. So what it ranges between, and this, I'm sorry?
That was 825 to 1.4.
Yeah, I was going to say 860, but I'll take 825 to 1.4. Now, that's a range that as soon as you go in there and you do complete tenant improvements, in both the case of the historic courthouse and the current admin building, particularly the current admin building, those spaces could be moved into basically without any tenant improvements. That's particularly true in the current admin building, because we're moving people from one kind of offices to the next. Now, somebody may get a bigger office, they may get the CAO's office than they have right now, but that's a minor consideration when we're trying to get all this shuffling done. So, with the courthouse itself, your biggest expense is going to be that elevator. You're looking at about $300,000. But you know, you're going to have to do it sooner or later if you're going to keep that as an operational facility. Other spaces in there, people could move into, as they already have. So you might not have to even spend the, what are we saying, 825 or 860, somewhere in there. You might not even have to spend that. It's particularly true when you look at admin, which is over on page 5, that graphic, and that shows 405,000. That could essentially be close to zero. We're saying at a bare bones, we figured about 50,000 probably if you wanted to get data and that kind of stuff reorganized. So you're looking at estimates that are in here right now for doing tenant improvements. Some tenant improvements may not need to be done. And Richard's got some information too on BLM and what he thinks the cost of that's.
Sure. I don't want to get it too much detail, but we may be negotiating for this building, but I think the distinction between lease and purchase, I think, is kind of just a general discussion we can have. Given all the factors we know about the current market and so forth, interest rates, et cetera, my intuition tells me that the best long-term strategy would be to try to purchase the building, do the improvements we need to do to it to make it fit us, maybe finance that over some reasonable period of time, 20 years or so. rather than be subject to annual lease at the end of which we don't have a building. That's what my intuition tells me. I think what we would need to do if we decide to go this route is do a real analysis on lease costs versus purchase costs, and go to the negotiating table and see what we might come up with. I think, you know, reasonably speaking, the purchase price of any kind of building like that today is probably about half what we would pay to build one, or less, to actually construct
that's
one
true.
with prevailing wage, et cetera. So I think, you know, if we determine that it's a suitable building and that we want it, I think purchasing it would be much cheaper than trying to have one built. With regard to the child support services, the funding source is a little bit unique with them compared to the other departments that we would put down there. They are able to pay rent, in quotes, to the county. They're a county function funded through the state. They could pay their share of the cost of that or any other building, you know, based on some reasonable formula, whether that be square footage or some other reasonable method that we allocate the costs. So that, you know, if they were at 17,000 square foot building, if they used, you know, we're talking rough numbers, if they used 4 or 5 of that, maybe a quarter of the cost could be billed back to that function. Public defender, district attorney, probation, the other departments we talked about are essentially general funded anyway, and either general or general like funds pay their rent, so the county would be on the hook for that, for making those payments. The other, Harry mentioned earlier, the energy component of it. Supervisor Hammond's been particularly interested in this. I think we would want to study the savings that we might achieve by getting out of, you know, this building and improvements to the courthouse and other buildings to, you know, maybe capture some of those savings and put that towards investment in this building. And it wouldn't account for all of it, but I think that would contribute towards cheapening up the cost of that.
Well, the other thing too is that the lease rates, at least the ones I've been involved with for child support, are such that they are higher because of the security things that are in there. So they're used to paying more for their space than you would pay for typical office space, because you've got active alarm systems, you've got that sort of thing.
And like I said, we're really early in the discussion of this, but what I'd like to explore, if we do go towards a purchase of a building and improvements over here to the courthouse and the administrative offices over there, I think it would probably be wise to bundle those into one financing mechanism, maybe something along the lines of what we did when we constructed the jail with a certificate of participation. Interest rates remain very favorable to that kind of a. For now. But we could be looking at a, you know, couple, $2 or $3 million issuance to maybe accomplish all of this at once and then have an annual payment or semi-annual payment for 20 years or so. It would partially be offset by savings and efficiency. And hopefully savings in not just energy efficiency, but workflow efficiency, where maybe we don't need as many employees to do the same job.
Oh, you certainly would. Plus, people don't stop to think about things. Susanville is a rather small city. So somebody going from the historic courthouse to the new courthouse doesn't take terribly long. But when it's somebody that's going there every day, and often being disrupted in a major way because the judge says, I want him or her in my courtroom right now. Then having them close, even though it's a short distance, if you do a time motion study on that over a year, it's a lot of money. So you do get to the point where maybe employees and that sort of thing become much more efficient. Plus, in the end, if you go in this direction or one similar to it, you're going to end up with good county properties that now will be energy efficient. You know, they'll be less in the long term. There won't be issues that you have to deal with down the road. So you put the county in a good position all the way around. And most of all, your citizens will know exactly where to go. County administrative functions, we go right to the courthouse square. We keep our historic courthouse. And justice, we go down either to the court or to the county justice facilities down there. So it works out. And in both the case of the energy and anything done to the historic building, we want to take a look at grants too, because there are some out there. It just, we have to decide what we're willing to do and not do to get that money. And historic, you want to do adaptive reuse, you don't want to try to redo the interior. But the exterior may require new fenestration, windows, that sort of thing. But if you're going to redo it for energy anyway, now's the time. So you may be able to get some of that money too.
One point that occurs to me is to the degree that child support function requires that kind of enhanced security stuff, and historically there's not been much funding available for the district attorney or public defender function for those kinds of security measures.
Go ahead.
It would be, I think, desirable for at least the employees and management in those departments to maybe piggyback a little bit on what might be installed for the benefit of the child support folks, just to keep them all safe.
Well, and Richard's idea about bundling this thing, that's important because security things, while we may be concentrating on BLM, there may be some other areas in the county where we want a little bit of additional security. A bundled package is going to be less expensive than if we just piecemeal it out all the time. Plus, you're going to get one contractor in doing all that work, so it's all integrated in the sense you want it integrated. So, yeah.
In your LMUD bills, there's a California Public Benefits charge, and that is for energy efficiency. So if you would check with LMUD about just LED lights, insulation, all that stuff comes under that moniker.
Okay.
And it's probably a considerable amount of money that is available. You know?
Oh, yeah, no, I was just making a note of that. I wasn't disagreeing with you at all. No, there is.
Small? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I think there, oh, you're talking to somebody else.
Yeah.
It depends on, yeah. You want to look for that kind of grant funding,
Yeah.
wherever you can get it.
One thing we didn't deal with in the study, because it's not currently occupied and not currently part of what we're using, but Bob points it out to me almost every day, the old jail is,
Oh. Well, we did discuss it, but we didn't put it in here.
it's continuing to deteriorate. We went through it earlier this year. You can see daylight through the ceiling.
Well, the roof's in
It-
terrible shape.
It may be something that, even though we don't intend on using it for office space, that we may want to incorporate it in whatever project we do to preserve what's left, I guess, is
Yeah. One of the things you have is fairly unique in historic preservation these days. You have a courthouse square with the courthouse intact, more or less, and the jail still sitting there with, the exterior. Money for doing the exterior and stabilizing it is easier to get than restoring it completely, although, there might be enough money out there to do that. But you could do something with it, and I'd look at it in two levels. One is, we just want to preserve the exterior appearance because it's right next to the historic courthouse, and we want it for the citizens of the county. The second way to look at it would be for adaptive reuse money. And in that case, what you'd want to do is you want to stabilize the structure. You might not use it for anything more than storage, but it would allow you to do an adaptive reuse. Or if the money was right, you could use it for offices. Rehab it for offices. It just depends on what's available at the time in terms of historic preservation grants. But you have a unique piece of history there. You have the court and you have the jail, side by side on a courthouse square.
There's two distinct portions of that old historic jail. There's the front, what might be referred to as the historic offices area of what was the sheriff's department. And then there is the back, what might be called the tank area.
Right.
And they're structurally two distinct, they're not separate, they're attached. But I think there's been some discussion from the floor of this board in the past, at least by one supervisor who's not present today, to perhaps sever the two.
Perhaps what?
Sever the two. Retain the front half, the offices portion,
Well, you
consistent
could
with.
do that, or you could.
Just floating what had been discussed once before. But there's no question.